Okay, so psychedelic drugs, cannabis, and mental health. These three things are something that have been so controversial. Throughout history, different shamanic cultures have utilized different kinds of plant medicines. Throughout history, other religions have said certain things like this should never be used, should never be taken into the body. Today, we're hearing different people write blogs and articles and books about how certain things raise your vibration and certain things lower your vibration, right? We hear about ayahuasca ceremonies, people having extraordinary experiences, and we hear about ayahuasca ceremonies and people ending up with long-term mental health issues. So the first question I have for my extraordinary panel here is if there are any immediate things that you'd like to share about your relationship to these ideas so that we can have a premise to continue the conversation. Can we start with you, Dr. Ron?
Yes. I think the most important thing before you undertake an exploration with any type of drug is to have an assessment of your own family history all the way back genetically. And if there's any predispositions for psychosis, paranoia, schizophrenia, or depressive disorders, you should tread very carefully and very lightly in the psychedelic aspect of exploration.
Fabulous. Jessica?
I want to start with cannabis because I really believe cannabis is a medicine, and that is supported by science. Our body has an endocannabinoid system, which is a system of receptors that bind to the receptors in the cannabis plant, and they promote homeostasis, which is basically making sure our body remains stable when environmental conditions change. So with this fact comes the understanding that our bodies need cannabinoids, and we should be putting cannabinoids into our systems through both the cannabis and the hemp plant. And so when people tell me that, they don't do weed or they don't believe in cannabis, I first tell them to explore their own endocannabinoid system and the growing evidence that many health issues such as IBS and maybe even Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, migraines, a lot of these could potentially be endocannabinoid deficiencies, which is basically the idea that our body doesn't have enough cannabinoids, active compounds from plants. So I firmly believe that plants are here to help, and some of these plant medicines are the most powerful and misunderstood medicines that exist for us.
Thank you. Mathew?
I like to eat mushrooms. I find that they're quite an ally. I've never actually framed the thought in this sense, but there's almost there's a version of oneself before you were introduced to psychotropics or ecotropics, and then there's a version of oneself afterwards. And I think in looking at that transition in my own life journey, I wouldn't have made a lot of the great mistakes that I ended up making that got me to where I am if I hadn't been introduced to a different way of thinking that were presented through the use of a psychedelic. And I think the historical record will back me up that every culture that's ever graced this planet has looked to plants to try to reveal the essence of life to the culture or to the individual. And I think we're in a very interesting time right now where we have the first somewhat psychedelic plant being normalized by one of the most destructive civilizations that's ever existed in ours. So happy to be on the panel. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm going to probably do that often.
Well, okay. Thank you for that. That was actually illuminating. So your general relationship to the topic, Guru Jagat?
So my teacher, Yogi Bhajan, said at this point on the planet, we're going to have somewhere between 30, I think 30 is a conservative, maybe all the way to 50% of the planet's going crazy in one way or another. And so the pressure of this age is so intense on the human psyche that many people don't know what to do. And I think anything that is making someone feel better and gets them, through the day is better than not feeling better and getting through the day. And so I think it's all about a relationship with everything. So anything that is external or internal to us, it's about our relationship. If we have a right relationship with self, then we're going to have a better relationship with things that are not self or appear to not be self. And I feel like it's a macro-micro cosmic experience.
Fabulous. And Ora?
I do think that there is a big movement towards exploring the self, and I think there is the journey of the inward exploration and the outward exploration of that. What we're seeing, the macro-micro, really to me is an indication that people are searching and they want answers and they want to go deeper into the self. And that is a journey of the self. It needn't be the journey of others or the journey of the masses, but your own exploration of what you feel you want to move towards, to be able to understand yourself, what you're doing here, what your purpose is. And I think that the planet is filled with many different things that it offers up to us to aid us in that exploration, whether we choose an inward journey and we choose meditation, or we choose things like plant medicine or whatnot to aid us in the exploration. These are personal choices, first and foremost. I view it all as the journey of the self and what we're doing here, and to be very mindful about how you make those choices and what does feel authentic to you and what does resonate for you in making those choices, be it plant medicine or meditation or anything that aids in the exploration.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And so here to recap, Ron, you gave us some really good insight on the general precautions when approaching psychedelics. Jessica, you shared about the human body's endocannabinoid system that has receptors for cannabis, and that there's some very interesting research around that, and for our well-being, and even the implications of certain conditions actually being deficiencies, which I've never heard before, so it's a very interesting consideration. And Mathew, you like to eat mushrooms, you said. I know a few people that might agree with you. And your company, FORIA, I'm actually familiar with. So there's like lube. You have like cannabis lube and suppositories and different products like that. And so you obviously are working in the wellness, the direct support wellness part of the cannabis industry. And I also really appreciated what you brought up about the pre-psychedelic you, pre-psychotropic you, and the post-psychotropic you. Guru Jagat, I really appreciated this idea that there is a certain kind of amelioration of suffering that people experience in today's very insane world. I agree that 30% insanity is a conservative estimate.
Yeah.
And Ora, I really appreciated what you brought to the conversation, which was this idea that it is a personal choice, that it's about our individual incarnation, it's our individual journey, our exploration of self. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a mixed bag up here. This is a lot. Pay attention because you'll know how to do your drugs better. Okay. So, Ron, I really appreciated the initial tip that you gave us, because I know a lot of people are realistically listening to hear how they can do their drugs better. And I know that there are some people listening because of a very genuine, realistic concern. I know that when I was younger, I was very interested in psilocybin. I was very interested in different things like that, the psychedelics. But there was this area of not knowing if it was actually safe. Hearing a whole different array of propaganda around it. We have the DARE system, which is that all drugs are bad and you should abstain entirely from them. And we have all the different lobbyists that support and deny specific things along the way based on specific agendas along the way. And so, Ron, you said that one of the first things that we should do when we're looking into psychedelics is to look at our family history and see if there are any kind of mental issues. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes. I'll use myself as an example. I come from a long line of Irish Catholic alcoholics in Boston. And so when I was 16, I discovered cannabis. And I had a good friend because we were playing in a band together. And when Sgt. Pepper's came out, he said, let's lay down on the floor. And in those days, you'd lay down between the speakers, turn the turntable on.
Sound bath.
Yeah. And he said, let's listen to the album from beginning to end straight. So we did. And then he said, okay, let's get high. And so we had some pot and then some hashish. And then we lay down on the floor and we listened to it the second time through. And of course, in the high state, it was rather very surrealistic and highly amplified. However, just on a personal basis for me, I started smoking pot and really got into it because of a family history of depression. And that pretty much carried through till I was 20. And then in Amherst, we had this world religions class, and we invited Yogi Bhajan, Haridas Baba, Sasaki Roshi, Houston Smith, Gene Houston, a whole variety of wonderful thought thinkers. And I had the opportunity to meet with Yogi Bhajan and Haridas Baba privately, and I said, is there a good and a bad when it comes to the exploration with psychedelic drugs or pot? And they both said, it's neither good nor neither bad. But Haridas Baba said something interesting that really touched me, which led me to move into a spiritual exploration where I became one of the first Kundalini yoga teachers in America and co-founded the Kundalini Research Institute. And what Haridas Baba said was, psychoactive drugs are very helpful at opening the door into the mystical, into the creative, and visiting with the divine. However, don't you want to become and learn how to become the divine over time? So visiting,
Beautiful.
opening the door, and then I think where spiritual practices come in. And again, it doesn't have to be, if you do a spiritual practice, you can never smoke pot again. You know, there are some teachers and there are some systems that have that rigidity. However, in my own personal experience, I found over time that the more that I did my yogic practices and spent time in India and studying meditation in monasteries in Sri Lanka, is I found that I was progressively developing a stage-by-stage approach to awakening and enlightenment.
Okay, so this is really interesting. The idea of a state of consciousness versus developing the stages of awakening. So this idea of cultivating a sense of increased awareness through meditation, concentration practices.
Yes.
But
in the transpersonal psychology movement, we've had this, because I was one of the early pioneers and researchers in psychedelic drugs under Stanislav Grof. I was an intern at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Baltimore, Maryland. And then from there, I transitioned into becoming one of the early researchers on Kundalini yoga and meditation under Yogi Bhajan's tutelage, where we used Kirlian photography to study the difference between states of consciousness and stages of consciousness.
and how did they look?
Well, interestingly enough, when we took a picture of a person under the influence of a psychoactive drug,
Which drug?
well, we used psilocybin, marijuana, and LSD. And there were interesting color patterns that extended out with a multiplicity of colors. When we put someone under Yogi Bhajan's influence, one of his students was Premka Khalsa. He put her into what was called enter a God state of consciousness and to do this kriya, where she had to breathe for 20 minutes. Then we took photos of her auras, and instead of a multiplicity of colors, there was this huge expansion of white light.
Fascinating.
So it's just differences. Differences, neither better, neither worse, but I think developmentally over time in the transpersonal psychology movement, we've had this conflict and controversy about, is it better to get high and then come back, which is the state approach, or is it useful to get high, come back, and embrace a daily spiritual practice, yogic and or meditative? And of course, I've been meditating and practicing 5 different forms of yoga since 1970. I would honestly say I like the stage approach. And again, I'll be perfectly honest.
The occasional state.
I like to experiment and get high. And I also, from time to time, I call it a spiritual reboot, undertake under very, very important guidance, set and setting. See, that's another thing that came out of Harvard in the early psychedelic research, which is if you're going to take a psychedelic drug, make sure your mindset is in good mental health, rather than if you're depressed or you're in a paranoid state. No, mindset not good. And then setting.
So would you recommend, and I want to actually hear from, specifically related to the states and stages, I want to hear from Guru, Jagat, and Ora specifically on that. And I have another thing for you guys after that. And so set and setting, states and stages, those are the areas that we're dealing with right now. So this idea that in the experimentation of a psychedelic drug, the set and setting, the environment is important. I've had friends tell me that they did mushrooms at a loud party and they had a terrible experience. I've heard people say that they did mushrooms out camping in the forest and had a very mystical experience. So Guru Jagat, Dr. Ronald brought up a lot of different points. Was there anything in that you wanted to speak to?
Yeah, basically we're creating an understanding of the human operating system through any of this exploration, and I kind of liken it to getting an IKEA instruction, like, you know, the one sheet that's in Swedish with like a little kind of tool. That's basically, I mean, you're barely given that with your human body and your mind. So we don't really know how to use this great, incredible computer and this machine, and then the soul that is riding on this vehicle. So when you're trying to kind of figure out, which is what's happening in this age in the wellness industry and what we call the age of Aquarius, and why these conversations are even happening now, when you're trying to find it out, you're basically trying to create a pattern in your neurons that is something that you can recreate over and over again that will create a lifelong change. I mean, we're all looking for some sort of change. We want to change, we want to grow, we want to evolve, and the pressure of this age is on us to do that very thing. That's what the pressure is here for. So you're looking for a way to create a pattern, and you know, Dr. Ron's talking about a daily practice with certainly any kind of athlete or elite thinker or someone who's really doing something with their life in a way that's you know, memorable to them and others is doing something every day that creates a pattern that will allow them to kind of lead themselves out of the pattern of the kind of self-hatred and the self-sabotage and the fears of the future and the bad relationships and the, you know, self-unworthiness and all these kind of the familial traumas. So you're looking for a pattern creation.
Right.
And if you can find that in some sort of external experience of taking an herb that's maybe not a psychotropic or maybe just like an herbal medicine,
right,
or if you can find that, then you know, that's going to be something that feeds you in that way. But ultimately, the thing has to be kind of recreated on a daily basis through the neuron and the mirror neurons and the nervous system and the limbic system and the frontal lobe of the brain and the whole patterning of the system, so that then you can change, and we all want to change.
And so what I find interesting, that sort of this subtext here, is that the psychedelic experience has an advanced quality to it. There's an increased heightened awareness to it. Ora, I really appreciated what you just shared, Guru Jagat. Ora, I recently read on your Instagram that you said, we aren't getting on the starship, we are the starship, right?
Right.
And so I really liked, I thought maybe you could take share some of your thoughts from that space of we are this complex being, like Drew Jagat was saying.
I think that the whole notion of the experiential idea of what we want to experience. You know, these are very interesting times that we're in right now. And I think, yes, very much that within, that without. This is an incredible time to find out what we're doing here, especially in the midst of tremendous chaos and uncertainty. You know, whenever there's something that's very magnified externally, it gives us a great opportunity to go even deeper within ourselves so that we can have a better understanding of why there is such an external manifestation that can be unsettling and disruptive. The whole idea of, you know, choosing whatever it is, whether, again, it's through psychotropic drugs or meditation or whatever it is that helps us be more aware, become more mindful, become more awake. I mean, for me personally, just having started this organization, the Institute for Transformational Thinking, just the word transformational.
So would you say that you agree with Ron's, this concept of the...
I do, because really what I know Ron brings up, and it's such an important point and very illuminating really to understand the states. You know, do we make conscious decisions to reach for something so that we can experience an altered state? And what do stages really mean to us? You know, it is through the inner journey that we can explore what those stages of awakening are for us. You know, I think it begins to always return back to self. You know, am I looking for something externally so that it could put me in an altered state of consciousness?
Bring you back.
Yes. So, you know, it's a very important thing to discuss the states versus stages.
Right. And one more thing on set and setting. It's also from a psychiatric perspective. If you are taking any form of antidepressant, or what we call the modern day designer drugs, and it's not so much with cannabis, because cannabis kind of takes you into a very nice neuronal place. But if you're taking Prozac or Wellbutrin or Zoloft or any of the modern day designer antidepressants, don't mix your drugs. Go see the physician or the psychiatrist that put you on them, and they'll probably tell you exactly what I'm going to say, which is either wean off them, because taking DMT with Prozac, folks, doesn't work. And I'll give you a very short story. I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning about 10 years ago from one of my patients, and he's in Culver City jail. And he had taken ketamine, psilocybin, and ecstasy, and he was on Prozac. And he called 911 and he said, "I'm dying, come and get me." And what was really happening is he was going through death rebirth symbolically from the psychoactive drug. And he ended up in jail because the paramedics came and they found all these drugs in his house. So you have to be very, very careful. And then second, in terms of spiritual practices, one of the things that both Haridas Baba and Yogi Bhajan taught us in terms of making some of the transitions away from daily constant drug use was the importance of a spiritual practice, a sadhana. And Yogi Bhajan used to say, if you do your spiritual practice daily, keep up, and then everything will come, and to set your mind on what you want, and it will manifest. And it was a great teaching, and I embrace it, and I teach it today as a mindfulness teacher. Set your mind on what you want, and it will manifest.
Fabulous. So I want to speak with Jessica and Mathew. I really appreciated what we've gotten so far from our amazing panel here is this idea that the psychedelic drugs, when used with the right chemistry in your body, have very extraordinary effects and potential, and that they are offering, I really appreciated, especially what you said, Guru Jagat, about the imprint, that it gives you that direct opportunity through the neural pathways in your brain. It gives you that sort of mapping of what really advanced heightened awareness might look like, so that as you incorporate your daily practice, you've got almost like that cellular memory to go back to. And of course, I appreciated something that you mentioned that I want to come back to with you, Ora, the idea of transformational thinking. So this is a kind of practice similar to like spiritual psychology, where you would be working with the thoughts occurring in your mind. So can I hear from you briefly about like the relationship between like this idea of the awakened neural pathways, the awakened mind, and just thinking? The idea, you made a distinction between taking something in and going within.
Yes, I mean, the transformational mind, the mind is where I believe it all begins. It begins with our thoughts, and our thoughts create everything. And our thoughts do create our states of awareness. Our thoughts do create what we feel. Our thoughts do create whether we feel an altered state of awareness or a heightened state of awareness, or we feel emotional ups and downs. I mean, it's all about that. So my particular research, my particular inquiry is the thinking mind. It is what we produce from our thoughts, the chemicals. I mean, new thoughts do create new neural pathways, and positive thoughts can create neural pathways that you default to that thinking, as opposed to old patterns of thinking that could be negative and fear-based.
So that concept of neuroplasticity, right?
Yes, and with all the neurosciences that we're coming to know today, the direct link between the plasticity of the brain and how thoughts can literally create new neural pathways and change brain chemistry.
Fabulous, fabulous. Are you guys taking notes? Mm-hmm. You should be. Okay, so Mathew, you created, and do you have so your company is FORIA.
Yeah, I had one follow-up though, I think.
Yeah, okay, go for it.
Just to maybe flip that notion a little bit, because I feel like historically we've looked at the use of psychedelics in terms of what's in it for me.
Right.
Generationally, that pretty much is played out. That narrative is played out. And I think the pressing issues of the time right now are, ask not what your psychedelics can do for you, but ask what they can do for your ecology, for the whole systems ecology, because we have more whole systems awareness now than any other generation that existed before us. And if we're using the same maps and applying psychedelics within the same models that have come before us, we're failing. We have to pull from the collective knowledge that's available now, and we know that systems are at risk. And I think I look at the use of psychedelics not so much as how is it going to make me more transcendent, but how can I be more of service to the collective? And the collective being the ecology of the living planet.
And so I know, I'm less familiar about your particular spiritual practice, Jessica, but I know, Ron, you've made it very clear what your tradition is. Guru Jagat, you're in the Kundalini tradition, or you're also in mindfulness. So from a spiritual perspective, would you agree that to become more transcendent, at the same time you would actually become more of service? That those are intertwined and related?
Would I agree with that? I feel like the idea of enlightenment, of doing spiritual practice or doing, some sort of, psychotropics, the teachings of Don Juan, the idea of that being for enlightenment or transcendence, I feel has been shattered in this new age, where it really is, how can we become just better people, better parents, better business people, better community people,
a better ecology, like Mathew was saying. Okay, interesting. So Jessica, we're hearing a lot from the panel today about the mind, about the spiritual relationship to psychedelics. I'd like to hear, you brought up a very biological, physical, which also, Ora, you also did, but a very biological, physical component to specifically cannabis. That's your wheelhouse.
But I believe in all of it. I do it all.
Oh, okay, okay. So could I hear a little bit more about your connection to all of it? You shared a little bit about cannabis, but these others?
Yeah, I'd love to share a personal story, if that's okay.
Fabulous.
So
if everyone wants to plan a psychedelic story that they want to share quickly, I think that would be interesting. Jessica?
I think so much about this conversation is also a conversation we all need to have with ourselves about if we're ready for the type of change that these plants can provide. For so long, I was kind of tempted by the idea that, if someone handed me something, I should take it. It's easy to say yes when someone hands you a psychedelic drug at a party, but it's way harder to ask yourself if you're ready for that type of transformation. And
Right.
for a long time, I would just take what was given, and I got myself into a lot of horrible situations. One that comes to mind is I was speaking at a similar wellness conference and was handed a bottle of LSD, and I ended up taking too much and kind of losing my mind. But I credit that situation to a time a few months later when I was ready, and I actually want to bring Mathew into the story. So Mathew invited me and my business partner, Jackie, who's here, into his home in Topanga, and he introduced me and Jackie and I to his beautiful fiancée, Colleen, and I basically looked at them and I saw this love in their eyes that I can only describe as kind of soul-connected love. It's this kind of sparkle, and I always knew I wanted it, but I could never find it. And we had a beautiful afternoon, and a few weeks later, I was also handed mushrooms, but I was ready. I had done a lot of healing, and I really knew that I was ready for love, soul-connected, real love that I had seen with Mathew and Colleen a few weeks prior. So I was also at a point in my career where, I was building a startup, had very limited cash. I had so many reasons why I shouldn't go to Burning Man, even though I knew in my heart I was going to meet my soulmate there. So I did some mushrooms, I went to Malibu, I stared into the sun, and a light, one of my angels, told me to go to Burning Man, and that I knew already how to get there if I wanted to go. I already had the tools, I already had the knowledge to figure out how to get myself to this festival to meet my soulmate. And that experience gave me the courage and the strength to figure out how to get there. And I showed up at my camp Infinite Love on August 28th, and I met my soulmate on his birthday, and now we're engaged. And
Fabulous.
so it's kind of the idea
A
that
Virgo.
these plant medicines, these plants, they're not drugs. They give you the tools to unlock the magic you already have inside of you, but a lot of us go through life not really ready to confront that magic and that power, and it's so easy to tell ourselves why we shouldn't do things, why we're not worth it, why we deserve less, and it's so much harder to really step into the light and see what we deserve, which is love and support, and there it is. And
Fabulous.
right there, so.
All about that. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Something that you just hinted at, Jessica, that I believe Mathew said earlier, was this. You said, you really emphasized that they were plants. Guru Jagat, you said something about them being, that not all plants, approaching plants, they have different effects on us, right? There are a lot of different kinds of plants that are not necessarily psychedelic, that are allies. And Mathew, you started the conversation by saying that you like to eat mushrooms and it's a great ally. And I think that I want to kind of approach that level of the conversation right now. Guru Jagat, you specifically said that your relationship to the plant. And I know, Ora, we've had conversations in the past about really about set and setting. This concept of a spiritual setting, this concept of a very healthy, professional, sane environment that's a safe space for that. So I'd like to go into this conversation around relationship to the psychedelics. Mathew.
One thing to add to that point is, I think one of the most profound experiences I've ever had with psychedelics is when I was not taking the psychedelic, but I was holding space and witnessing someone else take the psychedelic.
Interesting.
So then I was able to integrate somewhat part of their experience in my normal frame of conscious reference. And I found that carried with me longer than many psychedelic experiences where I was under the influence. That actually holding space, bearing witness to, and receiving someone else's experience and seeing how you can be there for them had just as a profound impact. So if you're out there thinking, I'm not really interested in changing my consciousness using plants or chemicals, great, but maybe you have friends that are and you can serve and be in relationship with them through that capacity.
Right. Ora, did you have anything you wanted to share about how we relate to them, the set and setting, the ally?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that the setting, I think that was such a lovely story that you shared about how you ultimately met your soulmate. I mean, that's a beautiful story, and that was a path that you chose to meet, I think, the guidance that said go. You know, and our relationship to hearing what we want to hear, the truth that we want to ask of ourselves, the guidance comes in a myriad of ways. You know, again, I return back to the choices that we make that we feel can help us expand and can help us open and ultimately help us become more conscious, because that's really what is, I think, most needed. You started off, Guru Jagat, with the state of affairs of the world today. I think it's fair to say that we need to awaken. The time has come. So whether we choose, again, drugs or we go within, but the environment, if that's what you're asking, Ben, specifically.
Right, yeah, the is one conversation specifically that I had with you, Ora, was when we were on a retreat in Costa Rica.
Right.
And there was the opportunity to participate in a shamanic plant medicine ceremony.
Yes, I was thinking that, you know, I've always described my mind as rather psychedelic on its own. My mind
Transformational
my
thinker.
mind does just fine on its own, actually. I'm open to sprinkling it with whatever I decide or feel inclined to do, but my relationship to drugs early on, you know, with marijuana, basically I did and tried everything I wanted to, and it was great, and I enjoyed it until I no longer felt that I needed it, until my journey, my inner journey, wanted to explore the idea of heightened states of awareness with my own mind, and even sometimes the space between my thoughts, which really was helpful for me through meditation. So I hadn't done any drugs for a very long time. As I said, I did everything that I wanted to do, and then I was done. You know, these are decisions that we make. I felt that I was sated and I no longer wanted to, and I went on a very deep psycho-spiritual journey that had me exploring other things, the workings of the mind, you know, what is our mind, what are our thoughts, what are the chemicals that are in our own brain. And so I was teaching a workshop at WITMA, a wellness retreat in Costa Rica, and I came there to teach my workshop, Mastering Your Mind, Transforming Negative and Fear-Based Thoughts, based on my Says Who method. And I found myself, you know, again, these interesting little synchronicities that come about. And I had moved my massage to a later time in the day, and a lot of the people that were at this retreat, it's a wellness retreat, and ayahuasca is what they offer, and it's very much basically what a lot of people go there to do. Long story short, I found myself with the owner of WITMA, and he is, Jerry Powell is his name, and he is a great believer. He's had a tremendous awakening through plant medicine, and ayahuasca is something that he really opens up this beautiful retreat and invites you in to have what he calls a miracle, excuse me, an awakening through the plant medicine. I had no intention to do it. I was in sort of this premeditative state of I've come to teach, and even though I know it's an offering that's there, and there are shamans that are there to guide you beautifully, I might add, I just had made a decision prior that I was not, it wasn't really calling to me. And as I said, my history with drugs has left me very satisfied. Well, we were sitting, it was him, myself, and a yoga instructor. And basically, he's very encouraging, and he's very much the host of this place. And it's like he's offering up this meal, and it's plant medicine. So out of his enthusiasm and great love for the transformation that he experienced through the plant medicine, he really wants to share it with others very exuberantly. Anyway, he was very encouraging me to do it. And I said to him, as I just said, listen, I have a pretty psychedelic mind. I don't feel like I, at this moment in time, want to do it. I'd like to say he kind of wore me down because simply because it was suddenly what it did is it elicited curiosity in me, and it elicited in, I'm not attached to any sort of fixed idea. I consider myself a very open, expansive thinker. I like to be open and then decide in the moment how I perceive something and then make decisions from that. So I decided to try it. And I had there was nothing that was really in my mind about it. How I viewed it was I'm going to have an experience with a drug that I've never done before. Let's see what happens. And it was great. I had a very magical, beautiful experience that really met my present state of awareness. One could say, did it heighten my states or stages of awareness? Where does that begin and end? And even if there is such a thing as a beginning and ending, clearly I brought my awareness to that experience, and the plant, ayahuasca, invited me in, and it was a wonderful synergy that happened. So it was beautiful.
Fabulous. So really something that I'm really getting and that I'm hearing from everyone is that there's this question of context when it comes to these kinds of things. Context as in the chemical makeup of your own body, the needs of your body, the predispositions of your mental health. You mentioned in your story, Ora, you just said, the shamans which facilitate the space so beautifully, which I might add, which you said. and I think that matters. I think that the context is really relevant. I've had my own relationship with plant medicine. I happen to have been in that exact same ceremony with you that night. But also with cannabis. I actually really appreciate this wave of incorporating the cannabis into things like suppositories and into different ways, because to me that's part of context. To me that's part of set and setting. Are we consuming this marijuana first thing in the morning? Are we smoking throughout the day? Are we allowing that to be sort of what takes up our time and our energy, versus actually bringing the cannabinoids into the body, allowing them to do their work, and doing it in a way that actually distributes effectively into the physiology?
Something that's an interesting fact to take away about cannabis is that everyone knows THC is what makes you high, because it attaches to one of our receptors that produces an andamide. Andamide means bliss. The funny aside, the Israeli scientist who discovered the receptor that THC binds to, he named it an andamide, which is the bliss chemical. And they asked him, they said, well, you're in Israel, and you speak Hebrew, you're in Israel, you discovered this, why did you call it an andamide? He goes, the Jews don't have a lot of words for bliss, but the Indians, they have a lot of words for bliss. So he named it an andamide. And interestingly enough, when you put THC in your body, when it goes through your liver, which most things do, it creates a metabolite that's 3 to 5 times more psychoactive than the THC itself. So think about that. We're putting in an exogenous compound into our body that you'd think the body would go, let me break this down and make sure that the host, you, doesn't get too stoned or doesn't get too high. Instead, it does the opposite. It makes something that's even more psychoactive. So that's just open for, just to think about why that could be. As far as suppositories are concerned, one of the things that we're most interested about is that when you introduce cannabis rectally or vaginally as a suppository, you bypass the liver. You bypass that first metabolism. So you get these other benefits that cannabis has to offer, and you don't get high. So that's just looking at set and setting, looking at the delivery system will very much impact the outcome.
I just want to make the point in terms of personal practice that this isn't for everyone, but I'm into ruthless sobriety. I feel like the sobriety and the truth are way stranger than fiction. And what's actually happening in the most real way that I can, in the most sober way, face both my own mind and whatever's in front of me and the challenges and whatever's challenging our society, geopolitically, my business, my relationships, wherever I have to show up more or be stronger. I personally am into the most ruthless sobriety I possibly can have, because that gives me something. But again, I just want to be clear that your whole journey in this incarnation is to hunt for energy. So if it gives you energy and it strengthens your nervous system, which part of what's happening on the planet is that people are so depleted from the use of all sorts of things, just because we're kind of adolescent on this planet. We don't really know how to use the technology right, or we're just experimenting. So if something's strengthening your nervous system and making you able to show up more in a way that makes you feel better about yourself, then it's of great benefit to your particular journey. But my particular journey, I want to see how ruthlessly sober I can be with every single moment, just as an experiment.
And does that go into like your diet as well? Like, is there very low like sugar content?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a very sensitive human being, and part of Yogi Bhajan's teachings about this time is that the more sensory we become, which is part of, the younger generations have this crystalline kind of soul, or the crystal children, or the rainbow children, or the millennials and the Gen Z, or whatever you want to call them, the more sensory or sensitive we become, the more strong we have to become in order to be able to have that sensitivity and at the same time be functional and be, the change makers that we want to be.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Ora and Ron, you're both indicating that you have something to share. Ora, did you want to?
No, I was saying that I was thinking actually when you said that, the fierce sobriety. I like to think of the idea of being somewhere alone on a planet, isolated, and there's nothing available to me other than the self. And where will I go with that? What will I explore? Who am I? What is in there, without being able to reach for anything, be it a drug, anything other than the self. I believe it's all within. So everything that we do, everything that we experience is connected to within. We are at a time, I think we're all speaking about it to varying degrees. The opioids crisis is very concerning. For me, I look at that and I think, what's everybody numbing out about? What's all this over-medicating? What's going on? What is it that's so painful, that's so hard to be with? The inner journey is about going within and finding out what's there, all of the colors. I use the metaphor of a Crayola box. There's black and there's gray in there. You wouldn't be able to color a picture if you didn't have all of the colors in it. And yet we want to numb out, we want to anesthetize ourselves. This conversation is great and fascinating, and how we choose to awaken, these are personal decisions. But ultimately, for me personally, and we are all only speaking from our own personal perspective of how we see this incarnation and what we're each and every one of us doing here, whether you reach for something or you don't, whether you choose something to help you awaken or you awaken from within, none of these choices are to be judged by anyone other than yourself. I do think that coming to know ourselves, know thyself, know who we are in all of the aspects of who we are, whether you experience it sober or you experience it listening to an album high and you feel something you didn't feel when you were not high. It's your journey. You're on your journey. You are, as Ben said, I said, we are the starship. What do you want to get into? What do you want to reach out for? We are the ones. It's time for us to really awaken to who we are, not to escape, not to anesthetize, not to numb out, to the amazing, exquisite things we might realize about ourselves when we might take plant medicine. I'm with you on that one. I personally, and none of these things are said out of judgment, I want to go in there. I want to know what's there. I want to take the deep dive into self. Let me know what this is all about before I exit out of this body. I want to have that information, and I say, do not fear it. Do not fear yourself. Meet yourself. And if you want to meet yourself through plant medicine or whatever, meditation or dancing or jumping out of an airplane, whatever it is for you, meet yourself. Be willing and unafraid to meet you, the self that you are, who you were when you incarnated into this existence. Find out, be unafraid.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. I want to get a quick closing remark from each of you. So Dr. Ron?
I think it's very, very important to remember the importance of getting high for whatever reason, whether it's healing, self-exploration, creativity, or transformation, and then embracing a spiritual or a series of spiritual practices that will allow you to developmentally proceed through the stages of enlightened awareness and self-awakening so that we are high.
Fabulous. Jessica?
There's this interesting energetic shift that's happening where finally I feel like it's time for us to harness the power of the feminine. And a lot of these plants that we're talking about are female. And I started Cannabis Feminist because I believe that their role in helping us is to allow us to step into the feminine energy in all of us and soften us. And I think that'll just help all of us to think about it like that.
Thank you. Mathew?
I think perhaps the religions of the future will be plant-based again, just as the religions of the past were plant-based. So human beings will have direct access to ecstasy, direct access to transcendence, as we always have aspired towards. And my hope and my request of this group is if you know progressive rabbis and imams and priests and evangelicals that will embrace the use of cannabis specifically because it's the first somewhat psychotropic plant being normalized by our culture, those are the settings that can have tremendous impact in terms of the transformation of our culture. This group here is a bit further along on this journey, and if we want to think about real long-lasting impact, finding those groups of lights within more entrenched, conservative, religious-oriented peoples, and finding those individuals that might introduce plants into those groups, there could be some real profound impact there.
Thank you.
Just want to thank everyone here and on the panel, and Ben, wonderful job, very beautiful job.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
And yeah, very wonderful job. And I think that always my hope and my prayer for myself and for others is that you get even a split second every day where it's just you and you, and you get that sense or that little millisecond, or maybe you can expand it into a longer moment, which is a great treasure of just you and you.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, excellent job. I think I said it already. I think it's meet yourself. Meet yourself. Whatever your choices are, whatever you feel is going to take you closer to meeting your beautiful, divine, perfect self, those are personal choices that you make, and that you begin each day connected to your truth, your core, your center, and go from there. Go from there. Make whatever choices, mindful choices that you can, and think of how you can help support your awakening and how that can help reverberate out into the world and have a wider, farther awakening on the planet.
Thank you all so much for being here. I feel like I just had the coolest conversation with the coolest people.